There seems to be a select group of people, and you may know exactly who I'm talking about, that are whitewashing the evil that is happening in Iran, peddling conspiracy theories about what is actually going on, blaming Israel, blaming the US, making it about a land grab when Iranians, Persians are suffering every single day in the hands of the Islamic regime that kills and massacres its own civilians. Now, before we get into the interview with Mr. Bill Federer, I want to show you this clip by Candace Owens. And I mean, if you can stomach it, that at least. It's evil is really an understatement about what she's doing. She is a propagandist through and through. And after we show you this brief clip, I'm going to bring in the interview just so Mr. Bill Federer can set the record straight about what is actually happening in Iran, what has happened in Iran historically. Oh, by the way, Bill Federer worked closely with Charlie Kirk. Didn't stop working closely with Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk actually admired and revered Bill Federer. But here, I'm gonna let you take a watch of this.
Everywhere all the time. So many people, oh my gosh, you won't believe what these radicals are doing. And of course, it just seems to be that whenever Bibi Netanyahu's around the corner, like, hey, I want that piece of land, suddenly our media starts telling us, hey, you wouldn't believe how free these people are trying to get in Iran. These people are really, woo, we need to free the Iranians. Oh, they've been living in oppression. Bibi is over here like, oh, land. Oh, no, really? It's about spreading democracy. Code word, that's military code word for dropping bombs and stealing a bunch of stuff that isn't ours, a bunch of land that isn't ours.
But the lies, the whitewashing of what is happening in Iran, it's about a land grab. It's not about the thousands and thousands of people that have been murdered. Name one recent regime or government that slaughters its own people at the rate that this Islamic regime in Iran is committing. And meanwhile, she's telling you it's about Bibi Netanyahu. It's about Israel. It's about the Zionists. It's about the US and Israel collaborating for a land grab in Iran. This is sick. This is twisted. This is evil. So anyways, that's my monologue for right now. I'm sorry. This clip just had to be shared with you guys. This interview with Mr. Bill Federer, again, it's such a pleasure to have him always. I'm excited to share this with you guys, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Sanctify Israel podcast. My name is Jonathan Smith, and I'm your host today. We have a returning guest, and I'm so honored and privileged to welcome him back on the show. And it's funny, actually. We had a comment on our previous interview where someone said that he is basically like a walking encyclopedia. And I thought that was a pretty fitting description of our guest here today. He's an amazingly gifted historian. I believe God has raised him up for a time as this. And he has made appearances on C-SPAN, Fox, NPR, TBN, CBN, MSNBC. I mean, the list goes on about the national broadcast that he's been on. He actually spoke at Sugarline Bible Church's ProfCon last year, which is actually how I came across Mr. Bill Federer. He's a best-selling author. He's written over 30 books, including America's God and Country, Chains to Chains, and Rise of the Tyrant, the 6,000-year quest for global power. Former U.S. congressional candidate, and he is the president of American Minute, which the American Minute broadcast is actually held daily on the radio and on the internet. And you can find all of his wonderful resources at AmericanMinute.com. Thank you so much, Mr. Bill Federer, for joining us on the show today.
Yeah, it's great to be with you.
All right, so we're going to talk about a very pressing topic, and it seems like maybe it's not talked about enough. I know some people are talking about what's happening in Iran and the Iranian regime. I know a lot of people are speaking up about it, but it seems like there could be more coverage on this issue. And so I really wanted to talk about Iran today and the history behind Persia and how we got to the point of where we are today, where we now see numbers of upwards to 35,000, maybe even more, of the killing of its own citizens in Iran. and it seems like the Islamic regime could be on the brink of collapse. And as a historian, I know you recognize patterns, and you can put those patterns together and connect dots. What do you think is going to happen here next in Iran? And do you think we are on the verge of a regime change?
If they get support from America,
Mm,
right now the regime has the guns and the people don't, and so that's why you see these 30. One report 50,000 killed,
yeah.
300,000 injured, 24,000 in jail, who they say will not come out, and they torture them in jail, torture them to death. And so when you understand the mindset, 80% of people in Iran want a democratic government, but the Ayatollah is fundamental Muslim. I have on my website, AmericanMinute.com, I posted 3 articles on the history of Iran. And when you begin to look at it, it sort of fills in the picture of what's happening today. Now, Iran, America's a couple centuries old. Iran's millennia old, in multiple thousands of years, going back to the Bronze Age, 3000 BC. Back then it was called Elam, which is Noah's grandson, under Shem. And so the kingdom of Elam, uh, you have the king of Elam was Chedorlaomer that Abraham fought a battle against in 1900 BC or AD. No, excuse me, BC, and before Christ. So you have Abraham 1900 BC. Uh, the big change happened with Cyrus of Persia, and so he conquers Assyria, Babylon, the Medes, but then King Cyrus is the one who lets the Jews go back and rebuild their temple.
Hmm.
But then you have 7 centuries of Romans fighting Persians. It was sort of like the eternal war. I
Hmm.
mean, America's been around for, United States 250 years, but the Pilgrims was 400 years ago. But imagine 700 years of wars. That was Persia against the Romans. And even after the
Mm,
Roman Empire became Christian, they're still fighting. Matter of fact, it was because of this fighting that it allowed Islam to come along in the 600s. The Persians and the Romans Christians had this major, major war, and they so depleted each other's militaries that when Islam came along, they didn't have any way to stop them. And so Islam conquers the whole Byzantine area of the world, but then also conquers Persia. The last Zoroastrian Persian emperor was Yazdegerd, and he sends a message to the Muslim general Khalid ibn al-Walid. He was nicknamed the Drawn Sword of Allah because he was undefeated in 100 battles. And then General Saad, and he said, you can have everything west of the Tigris, and we'll keep everything as east. And if that doesn't satisfy your land hunger, nothing will. And the Muslim general Saad said, we're not fighting for land, we're fighting to convert Persians to Islam.
mm,
And so the famous Persian poet Ferdowsi wrote this 60,000 line poem. It's the longest poem ever written by any person. But in there, he has this line of Yazdegerd saying, damn this fate, the uncivilized Arab has come to make me Muslim. And
wow.
and so then you have the Muslims take over Persia. And the Persians had a higher culture. I mean, the 3 wise men were from Persia,
Mm,
going back to Daniel's time. At the day of Pentecost, it says that there were Elamites at the day of Pentecost, which was Elam was Persia. Um, but now you mix the Persian culture with this uncivilized Arab raiding bands on horses and swords and so forth, and it comes up with what's called the Islamic Golden Age. It's a more
mm,
moderate version of Islam, and you have scholars studying Greek stuff, but it all gets slapped down by a Muslim leader named Ghazali. And he said, stop studying Greek stuff, only study the Quran. And then the Muslims that had conquered Persia then conquer Pakistan and Afghanistan. And then you have the big switch from the Sunni to Shia. And so this was a big deal. For those not familiar, um, before I get into that, I have to mention the Mongols. The Mongols invaded into Central Asia. We're familiar with Genghis Khan, and kills 30 million people. And then Genghis Khan's grandson is Hulagu Khan, and he wipes out the Muslim capital of Baghdad and kills everybody in the town or the city. And so there's this story that the Mongols thought it was taboo to let royal blood touch the ground, so they took the last Abbasid Shah and rolled him up in a carpet and then had the horses trample him to death. And so his blood didn't actually touch the ground.
Mm.
Following him, you have Tamerlane, and he is a Mongolian who is now Muslim, and he mixes the Mongolian severity with the Islamic fanaticism. He kills 17 million across Central Asia, basically wipes out Christianity in Central Asia, conquers into Isfahan, which was Persia's greatest city, and has his men come back with a head in every hand, and he builds towers of 200,000 skulls cemented into these towers. And anyway, even President Truman in 1950 said, our laws are founded on Moses, elaborated on by Jesus Christ. And he says, the people we're in controversy with are inheritors of the program of Genghis Khan and Tamerlane, who were the world's greatest murderers.
Wow.
So that's sort of the first episode that I go through the history of Iran.
Right.
But then you come up with the switch. It's called the Safavid Dynasty. Safavid Dynasty around 1500. And the Shah, Ismaili the First, switches from Sunni Muslim to Shia Muslim. And so this is the beginning of the Shia. And so for those not familiar, Shia means Shi'at Ali, which is the party of Ali, sort of a political party. And Ali was Muhammad's son-in-law, married to his daughter Fatima. So the Shiite are descendants of Muhammad's son-in-law. Muhammad had a father-in-law. He had lots of father-in-laws because he had lots of wives, but the one was Abu Bakr, and he fought with Muhammad in his 66 battles and raids. And he says, I was with him. I know the way. And so the word for the way is Sunni. And so 85% of Muslims are Sunni, 15% Shia, and the fighting between the Sunni and the Shia is the fighting between the followers of the son-in-law and the followers of the father-in-law. And so that first century of Islam, it's a blood feud within this family. They're killing each other and assassinating each other, and if you read it, it's like the Cosa Nostra and the mafia and this family that has a lot of killing and looting and so forth.
Mhm.
And the Sunnis kill Ali's son, Hussein, and so that sort of cemented this eternal blood feud between the two. So now we have the 1500s. We have Iran is now, it's still called Persia at this point. Persia is Shiite or Shia, and the Turks and the 85% of the rest of the Muslims are Sunni. Then you have France makes a treaty with the Sunni Turks, the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. This is a big shift because for the most part, Europe was doing its thing. It had stopped the Muslims, with the Crusades. But now you have the Muslims under Suleiman the Magnificent, and they're invading into Europe. And the King of France is fighting the King of Spain. And so the king of France is captured, and the king of Spain makes him give up some land and then lets him go. And so the king of France goes over to Spain's biggest enemy, the Ottoman Sultan, and makes a treaty with. So from Francis I on, for 3 centuries, you have France is teamed up with the Turks, and this causes Spain to not be able to defend all of North Africa, which used to be part of the Spanish Empire, and then the
Mm.
Muslims conquer it. And so you have England. And so England decides to make a treaty with Persia. And so it gets a little interesting. You had the English started the British East India Company, but some of these English merchants were called the Shirley brothers, Anthony Shirley and Robert Shirley, and they traded with Moscow. And then they decided to go south of Moscow. And they kept going south, south, south till they ran into Persia. And they meet the Persian Shah, and this turns into an alliance between Britain and Persia. And so much so that even Shakespeare in his play, The Twelfth Night, writes about the Shah of Persia, and England becomes fascinated with this. Robert Shirley marries a woman in the Shah's court who's a Circassian, which is an area near the Caucasus, but it's called Circassia, and she converts to Christianity. And she's considered the first Persian ever to visit England, and there's a painting of her there in England. So the Shah is now sending an embassy over to Europe, and they go to Norway and England and France, and they finally wind up in Spain, and they're wanting to do a Persian-Spanish alliance to counter the Turkish-French alliance. Is this getting too complicated?
No, no, please. I know that this is all important information. So please,
Yeah,
please continue.
and so the new Shah is called Abbas the Great, and Abbas the Great has this delegation go over to Europe, and they meet with the King of Spain, and they say, "Look, we want to trade with you so bad, we will let you spread Christianity in Persia." And the King of Spain says, "I'll only do that if you force the 400,000 Armenian Christians that live in Persia to convert to Catholicism." It's
Hmm.
like, you had
Wow.
this open door. Why didn't you
Wow.
take it? But he nitpicks on that, and the he can't really go back and go back and forth and back and forth. I mean, it's
Right.
quite a long journey, and so it basically puts the kibosh on that
Wow.
ability to have an open door for Christianity in Persia because of the King of Spain. So
Wow.
but while they were in Spain, the one Muslim person that came along, his name was Ulbeg, he converts to Catholicism, and they give him the name Don Juan of Persia. And he actually writes a book about his life. So, but back to King Abbas. So he is fighting the Turks from the east, and Spain is fighting the Turks from the west. And Abbas gets control of the Persian Gulf with the help of the British East India Company ships. But Abbas is not that nice of a guy. There was this area around the Caspian Sea where you have Georgia and Azerbaijan and some of these countries, but there was a Christian kingdom of the Kakheti, Kakheti, and they asked the Turkish Sultan for help. And when Abbas finds out about this, he says enough, and he gets basically 2/3 of these Armenian Christians that live in that area and deports them, and then kills lots and lots of them. And
Wow.
so you have another sultan, and there's all this court intrigue and wives in the harems poisoning and strangling and killings and so forth. And
Yeah.
so you have another Abbas II, and he captures areas of India. India converted to Islam called Mughal. They're descendants of Tamerlane. And then the second is fighting Russia. And so there's a half a dozen wars with Russia pretty much over that area I just mentioned by the Caspian Sea.
Mm.
The Dutch start the Dutch East India Company. And so they're over there in Indonesia. An interesting trivia. For 3 centuries, the Dutch controlled Indonesia, which was Sunni
Wow.
Muslim.
Wow.
And whenever an imam started preaching violence to, overthrow and kill the Dutch would arrest the imam and banish him. And then when another imam spoke out, they would arrest him and banish him and imprison. Another one to speak out until pretty soon the imams got the message. Don't speak out and stir people up to do jihad violence.
Oh,
And it
interesting.
went into the Islamic culture in Indonesia. So they developed, after 3 centuries, a more moderate version of Sunni Islam.
Interesting.
Uh, so it's this idea that it's the software, not the hardware. It's the
Wow.
teaching, it's not the person. We
Mm.
love the Muslim person, and God loves them and wants them to believe in Jesus and get saved. We love the person. We just don't love this jihadi software that's spread through violent imams.
Yeah. So would
And
you say
so
the natural, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but would you say like the natural tendency of this Islamic ideology is violence and conquest, but like you mentioned, it was the response, like for example in Indonesia, of the constant, them getting the message basically that they shouldn't try and do this sort of jihadist mindset here in Indonesia that made them more moderate. So you're saying that's not really like the natural ideology of the Islamic understanding of how they should be operating.
Yeah. So in my book, I wrote a book. It's called "What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran: A History of Islam in the United States." I go through with Muhammad. So Muhammad was born in 570 A.D. His father dies before he's born. His mother dies when he's 6. His grandfather and guardian dies when he's 8. He's orphaned, taken in by an uncle, Abu Talib, who's a merchant who takes Muhammad on camel rides to different cities, and he hears about the different religions. He hears about the Persian Zoroastrian religion, where they believed paradise was filled full of virgins, so it would fulfill all the guy's desires. Muhammad heard this,
Mm.
liked it, he included it in his belief system. The Zoroastrians believed in jinns or genies, and that got into his belief system. Well, they went to pagan cities like Mecca, and they had a square building called the Kaaba that housed 360 different pagan gods and idols, and the most popular was Hubal, the moon god. And these pagans worshiped the moon, and their calendar began with the first sight of the crescent moon over the desert. And they had this rock they thought had fallen from the moon. It's a glass impact rock where a meteor hit the hot desert sand, melted it in this brown glass. And the pagans would kiss it, walk around and bow to it. Muhammad kissed that rock, and he incorporated that into his belief system. And then there's a religion called Manichaeism. A guy named Manes picked a little bit out of different religions to combine them. And one of the followers of Manichaeism was St. Augustine, till he met the guy,
Mm.
realized he didn't know what he was talking about, and spent the rest of his life debunking Manichaeism. But Muhammad heard
Right.
about this. Hey, this religion, you can take different pieces of different ones. Jewish faith, they had their Talmud. Some of those stories got into Islam. And Muhammad originally had his followers bowing toward Jerusalem.
Right.
And then there's the Christian faith. And even Encyclopedia Britannica says the gospel was made known to Muhammad through apocryphal and heretical sources. So Muhammad thought the Trinity was the Father, Mary, and Jesus. Nobody explained
Mm.
to him the Holy Spirit. And apocryphal, what's that? The Infancy Gospel of Thomas, written several centuries after Jesus by someone who knew nothing of Jewish life. It's filled full of so many errors that no scholar takes it serious. It would be like you writing a book of Abraham Lincoln growing up in China. And so nobody takes it serious, but those stories of Jesus making clay birds and clapping and they flew away and a playmate died and he raised him from the dead, sort of Harry Potter type stories.
Yeah.
Those stories were floating around the desert. Muhammad heard them and they got incorporated in his belief system, and the Muslims take them as fact. So we can
Wow.
identify all these beliefs that were pre-Muhammad that he puts together. He goes into he's 25 years old and he marries a wealthy widow that he's working for named Khadijah. She's 40. He doesn't have to work now. And so a movement was
Mhm.
sweeping through Christianity at the time called monasticism, where if you really become a Christian, you should give away all your money and join a monastery or live in a cave as a hermit. And so you
Mhm.
had these Christians called desert fathers that would live in caves. And so Muhammad decides he's going to go to a cave and pray. And a spirit, according to the hadith, squeezed him and commanded him to read. He said, I cannot read. The spirit squeezed him a second time, said, read. He said, I cannot read. And it happened a third time. And then he began to recite. And that's the word Quran means recitation. It's an oral thing because Muhammad was illiterate and his original followers were illiterate. The Jews and Christians were the only ones that could read. They were called people of the book. And so Muhammad um, uh, goes to his wife and he tells her that he thinks he's demon possessed. And so she, according to the hadith, says, well, tell me when this spirit appears. And he tells her, and she said, sit on my right thigh. And says, can you see him? And he said, yes, over there. Sit on my left side thigh. Can you see him? Yes, over there. Sit on my lap. And then she began to disclose her form and cast away some of her veils and said, can you still see the spirit? And he said, no. And she said, well, it must have been from God because it was embarrassed to look upon me without all my veils on. That was the test that Muhammad
Wow.
used to decide whether the spirit appearing to him was from God or not. Now, 1 John 4 says this is the test. Every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus the Christ is of Antichrist, right? But
Amen.
Muhammad was illiterate. He never knew he never could read the New Testament. And
Mhm.
so the wife takes Muhammad to her cousin, who is an Ebionite Christian priest of this heretical sect that said Jesus was a created being less than God. He said maybe the spirit that's appearing to him is the same one that appeared to Moses. And then that cousin dies. Now Muhammad's left with his spirit, and he pieces together his religion, goes into Mecca, 610 AD. He's really excited about his faith, feels like there's something in it for everybody, and nobody's excited. And then he begins to get confrontational, and they chase him out of town. In 619 AD, his wife Khadijah dies. It's his year of sorrows. He tries going to a city of Al Taif. They pelt him with rocks and stones. 622 AD, he goes north to Medina. It was a Jewish city. 3 Jewish clans controlled the city, and they're nice. They let Muhammad in as a Muslim refugee, the first ever Muslim refugee. He presents his faith. They say, you're not a prophet in the line of our Jewish prophets, and reject him. So he changes the direction of bowing toward Mecca, goes into the
Mhm.
minority neighborhoods, and he begins to organize a following. And as the following gets bigger, he decides to get involved in politics. We're familiar with the term community organizer. And so he gets political and gets demanding and demands that the Jews make a treaty with him. And they do. Now Muhammad's a political leader in addition to a religious leader. His followers back in Mecca, about 70 of them, they get belligerent and argumentative and confrontational, and they get chased out of town for disturbing the peace. And now you have lots of Muslim immigrants coming into Medina, and Muhammad does the victimhood thing. That we're the victims because the people of Mecca were intolerant of us. Therefore, we're justified in
Mhm.
robbing the caravans headed back to Mecca. It's a departure from Jesus, who said, if they take your coat, give them your shirt. And so Muhammad gets
Mhm.
verses from his Allah saying, you get 4 wives plus as many extra women as your right hand possesses. They're slave wives and bond women and so forth. They just don't have the status of a wife. And so he gets a fifth of the booty. One of the verses is Allah has given you the slave girls as your booty. And so he would send them out on their raiding missions and say, don't steal from the booty, because he gets a fifth of the booty. And so the Meccans send 1,000 soldiers to protect their caravan in 624 AD, and Muhammad defeats them at the Battle of Badra with only 300 soldiers, so outnumbered 3-1. He takes this as a confirmation from Allah. He's supposed to be a military leader. He fights in 66 battles and raids in the next 8 years before he dies, killing 3,000 people. The Meccans send 10,000 soldiers to Medina, and Muhammad digs potholes and trenches all around the city, which renders their cavalry useless because you can't charge your horses and camels across a field full of potholes. Muhammad goes to some of the tribes at night, bribes them, they slip away. Some of the other tribes at night threatens them, they slip away. Gets freezing cold for a week, the rest of them retreat. Muhammad goes into Medina and gets offended at one of the 3 Jewish tribes. The other ones keeps their heads low, and Muhammad confiscates their property, chases them out of town. gets offended at the second Jewish tribe, confiscates their property, chases them out of town. And now there's only one Jewish tribe left. He bottles them in their neighborhood for 25 days. According to the Hadith, he's taking a bath, and the spirit appears and says, how can you rest when all his enemies are in your midst? And he captures them and cuts off the heads of 600 or 700, sells the women and children into slavery. So within 5 years of Muhammad coming into the Jewish city of Medina as an immigrant, there's not a Jew left in the city. He played off their politics. If he would have said in 5 years there won't be a Jew left, they'd have made up with each other. But he picks on one, and the other two sort of keep away. And so this pattern is observable. Immigrate,
Right.
increase, eliminate. Immigrate into a host community as a refugee. Increase the number of your followers in the minority neighborhoods and get involved in politics. And then you have random outbreaks of violence, stabbings, acid attacks, rapes, and the previous inhabitants of the neighborhood no longer feel safe and they move out, and you take over the neighborhood. And you
Right.
do this again and again and again until you take over cities and countries. And there's a 1,400-year track record of this watching. So the Muslims conquered Jerusalem, which had been a Byzantine Christian city since Constantine. And the bishop, Sophronius, strikes a deal. The Muslims won't kill them if they agree to ransom their life once a year with a jizya tax. And as long as you pay it, you're what's called protected. But if you don't pay it, they can sell you and your wife and daughters into slavery. In 641, they conquer Syria, which was the first country to completely be Christian, evangelized by the Apostle Paul. And then they conquered Egypt, which had been completely Christian for 6 centuries, evangelized by Mark and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And there was a difference. The Coptic Christians were being persecuted by the Byzantine Christians from Constantinople, and the Muslims come in and say, we'll help you Coptics against the Byzantines. Well, they drive them out. And then Caliph al-Hakim cuts out the tongues of anybody caught speaking Coptic. And eradicated an entire language and made them all speak Arabic. And then there used to be 250 Catholic dioceses along North Africa, and the the Christians had taught themselves not to be involved in politics. Remember the monasticism, if you live in a cave, and it was their version of separation of church and state. It's like,
Right.
the Christians didn't defend themselves, and then they invaded Spain in the year 711, and then you had all these Visigothic Spanish kingdoms that didn't get along, and they pick on one, the other ones would stand down, you pick on another, the other ones would stand up. And so in 10 years, they conquer all of Spain, cross the Pyrenees, conquer southern France, and they're finally stopped outside of Paris at the Battle of Tours in 732 AD, just 100 years after the death of Muhammad in 632 AD. So the first century of Islam is a military campaign. So when we say, oh, let's go back to, the first century Christians, and they really had it right. Well, when the Muslims go back to the first century Islam, they're warriors. Now,
Ooh.
after they're stopped at the Battle of Tours, you have the Muslims take over Persia, and the Persians are more cultured, and so you have what's called the Islamic Golden Age. Then they become more moderate, because the Persians were a little bit more moderate, and they would read Greek classics, and you had a Muslim philosopher named Avicenna, and he's writing books on medicine and astronomy and math, another one called Al-Farabi, another one called Averroes. And they're beginning to say, well, maybe paradise is not filled full of virgins. Maybe it's more spiritual. And if you would have taken a snapshot of the world, you would have thought the Muslims are about to experience a renaissance, a rediscovery of Greek classics, because they're reading all these Greek books. But it all gets slapped down by a guy named Ghazali, and he is a mujahideen, a renewer of the faith. He's the most important Muslim after Muhammad, and he said, stop studying Greek stuff. Only study the Quran. And so it shut down the Muslim mind. Meanwhile, the Europeans had Thomas Aquinas, and they're like, it's okay to read Greek stuff if a pagan gets it right. Clock's right twice a day anyway. And so now you have the Muslims, the Mongols come in and conquer and wipe out the Islamic Golden Age, and then one of the Mongolian-related clans are the Turks, and they convert to Sunni Islam, and now they invade into what's rest left of the Byzantine Empire. It's Greece and Turkey today, but back then it was the Byzantine Roman Empire. All 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation were wiped out by the Muslim Turks. And
Wow.
then they finally the Christians beg the Catholic West for help. The West send help. It's called the Crusades.
Mhm.
Richard the Lionheart from England led the Third Crusade. St. Louis, King Louis IX of France, led the Seventh and Eighth Crusades. Crusades end, the Muslims pick up where they left off, and they conquer Constantinople, cutting off the land routes to India. And that's when Columbus set sail looking for a sea route.
Mm.
And anyway, I could
Interesting.
go through it, but now back to Iran. And so you have all these different sultans and shahs. The British come over there, and then you have the British East India Company, and then Russia's getting involved, and then the Dutch are getting involved in these politics, siding one over the other. And um, World War One starts, and Iran wants to sort of be neutral.
Mm.
But then after World War One, you got oil. Britain uh, didn't have oil, and so they started the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company in 1908, and you know it better as BP.
Mm.
And the Germans industrialize, and they don't have oil, so they make a treaty with Turkey. And so Germany and the Turks are teamed up. Britain and the Persians are teamed up over
Mm.
oil. The Germans lose, the Turks lose. And so the Turkish Ottoman Empire is divided up, and out of it comes a modern day Israel with the Balfour Declaration, the British Mandate, modern day Iraq, modern day Jordan, Egypt, and then Turkey and so forth.
Mhm.
And then you go over to Turkey gets a secular leader named Ataturk. And he's like, okay, we've had enough of fundamental Islam. He said, Mohammedanism is nothing more than Arab politics. It may have suited tribes in the deserts, no good for a modern progressive state. And so Ataturk secularizes Turkey and lets women get educated and gets rid of the fezzes and the burqas and the calls to prayer. And so he has a counterpart in Iran named Reza Shah. And in 1925, he overthrows the Qajar dynasty, who has been in power for 130 years, and he secularizes Iran. And he lets
Mm.
women get educated, and he lets them wear the latest fashions, and he lets businesses get started, and he is a secular leader. No more fundamental Muslim stuff. Well, then World War II starts, and the Shah, Reza Shah, didn't drive out the Germans from Iran. And so Britain and the Soviet Union teamed up, and they did a coup to overthrow Reza Shah. And the new person that assumes power in Iran is Mossadegh. He's the prime minister. The son of Reza Shah is put in as a figurehead, but he doesn't have very much power. And so Mossadegh is in charge of Iran. And then after World War II, Britain and the Soviets split, and the Soviet Union becomes more outspokenly communist. And Mossadegh begins to side with the communists,
Mm.
supported by this Tuda Communist Party. And what does he do? He nationalizes the oil industry in Iran, the largest oil refinery in the world. He basically takes all of Britain's oil. And so here's Britain with no oil. And so they appeal to Eisenhower for help, and Eisenhower does Operation Ajax, which is our CIA, goes over there and overthrows Mossadegh and then supports Reza Shah Pahlavi, the son of Reza Shah.
Mm.
And he's in power for 37 years, and he loves America. And he's meeting with Truman and Eisenhower and Kennedy and, Gerald Ford. He's meeting with all these and Nixon.
Yeah.
And so he's building the Cadillac Seville over in Iran. And he's secularized the country. Again, women get educated. Women can wear dresses. They can wear fashions. And the people of Iran were happy until
Mm.
Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter toasts the Shah at a dinner, saying that he's under his leadership, Iran is an island of stability in a disruptive world. But then Jimmy Carter begins to correspond with the Ayatollah, who's been exiled in France, and begins to pull the American support out from underneath the Shah
Mm.
and helps the Ayatollah to come in to Iran. And the Ayatollah takes all the pro-American generals and executes them on top of a high school, hunts down all the pro-American people and kills them all. And then Jimmy Carter is the hero of the Ayatollah. And
What was Jimmy Carter's intention or motive behind that?
Well, supposedly the communists were wanting to infiltrate into Iran, and they thought the Shah was not strong enough in trying to stop that. Although evidence is that he was, but America's CIA was pulling back. William Sullivan was the U.S. ambassador to Iran, and he's like, the Shah's not as good as we wanted him to be, so let's force him to leave the country and let the Ayatollah take over. Then we'll make a deal with Ayatollah Khomeini,
Mm.
and so that's what
Wow.
happened. But Ayatollah Khomeini gets in, and within a couple months, breaks every promise he made to Carter and
Mm.
says America's the great Satan, death to America, and begins to export anti-Americanism all throughout the Middle East. He supports Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis that attack Israel.
Mm.
And then you have Hezbollah having a chapter in Venezuela, and Iran firing missiles and developing nuclear weapons. And when you understand the Ayatollah, he's Shiite Islam, they think that if they can basically blow up the world with nuclear weapons, it'll help bring back their Mahdi, their
Right.
version of the Antichrist, basically.
It's
And
theological.
yeah, their theology is that if they can cause enough killing, that their version of Jesus will come back and he will kill all the Christians and kill all the Jews and kill all the apes and kill all the pigs. And
Mm.
it's very fundamental. The people of Iran don't like him. He is so fundamental. He insists that the Quran be in Arabic, but the people speak Farsi. So to
Right.
them, it's a whole foreign language. It's like the Middle Ages and the Bible's in Latin, right? And so
Right.
then he has religious police that go through, and if a woman is not covered up enough, they beat her and put her in jail, and she gets raped and she gets executed. And so the Ayatollah is got that same of jihad ideology that it's okay to kill lots of people and to spread their views. So there is the opportunity for America to do what they did in getting rid of Mossadegh, and
Mm.
there's even Reza Pahlavi, the one Jimmy Carter abandoned. He came to America and he died, but his son is in America, and I met him. He probably 25 years ago at a meeting, but he loves America. He grew up here, and the way the politics works in Iran, he's the only one that all the different parties recognize. And so there is this thought when they were doing those riots,
Mm.
protests in Iran, they were holding up pictures of Reza Pahlavi, the son.
Yeah.
Um, and so it is a place where 30 to 50,000 people at least. They said that the Iranian Islamic Guard were like shooting most of the demonstrators were under 30 and shooting them in the face and in the eye, and like 7,000 of them have lost eyes, and the hospitals are overrun, and
Right.
the ones in prison, they say, the way that they treat them, they don't come back, they torture them and try to get them to name all the names they can and then kill them. And so it tears our hearts,
Yeah.
especially when you read the report that the fastest growing religion in Iran is Christianity.
Right.
And CBN
Yes.
reported even a couple years ago this phenomenon of Iranians having dreams of Jesus.
Wow.
And I've actually talked to some of them. And, this
Wow.
one lady, she's shared how she anyway, but they would have dreams of Jesus, and a lot of them wouldn't even know who Jesus was, but they would wake up. This one lady, she was Iranian and she had moved to California and she was studying to be a hairdresser, and she has this dream of seeing Jesus, and then she turned and saw some water or something, and then she turned back, and Jesus wasn't there, and she said, "Where's Jesus?" And she wakes up saying, "Where's Jesus?"
Wow.
And then she goes to her hair, design school, fashioning school, and here's a couple ladies talking about Jesus, and she goes over and says, "Who is this Jesus?" And they like
Yeah.
look at her and know she's a so they bring her to church. And she told me, she said, they had opened the Bible, and she said they had the verse about how God loves me. And she said the moment I saw that verse, she said it was like something dark came out of me. And she said I
Wow.
felt the love of God, and I started weeping and crying. And
Wow.
and that's just one of the stories. I've heard lots of them myself. One another lady, she said that a man, he had this pain in his jaw, it must have been an abscess or something, and he had a dream that Jesus came and touched his jaw, and he woke up and his jaw was healed. And he's like, "What's
Wow.
this Jesus?" And so uh so these are people in Iran that it's a move of God, and yet that same Islamic spirit of the Boko Haram that's killing Christians in Nigeria and other different places, um, that this is an opportunity that
Yeah.
America, you know, an athlete when he's successful, he whether he likes it or not, he's a role model to young guys. And if he can drink and party and say, "I don't care about being a role model," right? It was shoved upon him because he's successful. And so he can say, "Well, you know what? I didn't ask for it, but I am a role model. I'm gonna start, being responsible." America, we've become the
Mm.
most powerful nation in the world. And for us to say, "Oh, we don't wanna get involved in these other countries," it's like, no, we've been exporting sin for 50 years, and Hollywood, and abortion, and the transgender agenda, all the LGB. It's just like, no, we have a responsibility to care about Christian brothers and sisters that are being killed when just a little bit of intervention, can help them. Anyway, that's my view,
Yeah.
and, and then,
Yeah,
of course.
that's a very good point of view because I know you mentioned this too. You say silence in the face of evil is itself evil. And I guess from an American conservative perspective, there are a lot of, I guess, a growing number of conservatives that believe isolationism in this regard is the more conservative position. So I guess for the typical or your average American Christian conservative, how I think what you said here, it seems like the more conservative position is this more aligned with American conservatism and Christianity that we should be involved in what's happening in Iran right now?
Yeah, well, you have Cuba in the 1880s had a independence movement that Spain was wanting to crush, and they get a Spanish general named, Valeriano Weyler, and he goes over there and puts hundreds of thousands of Cubans in concentration camps. He tells them, "If you're a good patriot to the king, then turn yourself in, and I'll put you in this concentration camp, and anybody that refuses will be shot on sight as a traitor." It's like, okay, makes sense. Whoever's not in there has got to be the. Well, they didn't have sanitation, and hundreds of thousands die. It's 90 miles away from America. And so this cry comes across to America, and the press picks it up and basically pressures William McKinley to do something. And so he does, and it turns into the Spanish-American War, and we free Cuba and the Philippines and Guam and so forth. But we've faced this decision in the past when, World War II. Are we gonna let, the Nazis take over and have these countries? The, Emperor Hirohito in
Right.
Japan, and so we have this, it's been shoved upon us because we've been successful and powerful that we are, the power on the earth, and God says, "To whom much is given, much is required." It says, "Rebuke the oppressor." and defend the orphan and the widow and the weak. Israel. Some say, well, Israel's the problem. No, it's the linchpin holding back the caliphate.
Mm.
And if Israel were gone, they would reassemble the united Muslim world under what's called a caliphate. Their goal is a one world government called the caliphate, with underneath of a caliph. And after the Ottoman Empire fell, it fell apart. But if they can get rid of Israel, and then they can reunite the Erdogan in Turkey wants to be the new caliph. I mean, he's even mentioned stuff like that. But if Israel were gone and they could reassemble a caliphate, you think that they're excited when Mandami gets elected the mayor of New York City? You haven't seen nothing yet. It
Wow.
would throw almost all of Islam into the jihad mode. It would be
Wow.
the beginning of the end, so to speak. And so instead of Israel being the problem, it's actually the linchpin holding back the
Mm.
reestablishing of the caliphate. It's a critical border. It's pushing back against that, and they know it. So they
Yeah.
call America the big Satan and Israel the little Satan. I mean,
Right.
that world, and it goes back to Cain and Abel. Islam's a religion of Cain, and those that believe in the Lamb are the religion of Abel, right? So
Mm.
Abel, God's on one side, we're on the other side, we've sinned, and the Lamb takes the punishment for our sin. And so throughout the Old Testament, who was saved? Well, those that believed in the Lamb. The law shows you you're a sinner, and the Lamb pays for your sin. In Christianity, we just happen to know his name. His name's Jesus. So they were doing it having faith in the Lamb to come. We have faith in the Lamb that came, but salvation is through the Lamb. But
Mm.
Cain was a religion of works, and we know it's works because God told Adam, the ground is cursed for your sake, and you'll bring forth fruit by the sweat of your brow. And so Cain's bringing forth fruit out of the ground. He's sweating. He's working. He's trying to work his way to heaven. And so
Yeah.
there's no lamb in Cain's theology. It's just works. And if you do works, you're going to be proud of your works because you're doing more than your brother. And so it's a religion of pride. And they
Right.
call it honor, but it's pride. And then it's when his works were rejected, it says his countenance fell. His pride was hurt. He was embarrassed. There was only the
Right.
mom, dad, and brother, but that was enough. And he gets filled full of hatred and anger and wants to murder his brother, Abel. So it's almost like the spiritual descendants of Cain are always trying to kill the spiritual descendants of Abel. All
Wow.
right. And so the Jews and the Christians trust in the Lamb, right?
Right.
And they don't. They trust in their. And Muhammad said, "Though I'm the prophet of Allah, I don't know what Allah will do with me." Right? They believe there's a big scale up there, and if they, but there's no.
Yeah.
Um, so
So assurance,
this
right?
is it's a spiritual battle. The globalists are happy to work together with the Islamists against the West. So both the globalists and Chinese, they want a one world government. The Islamists want a one world government. They're happy to work together. If they ever won, God forbid, they'll fight amongst themselves. There's no honor among
Right.
thieves. Right? The woman rides
Right.
the beast, and then the beast tears the flesh off the woman. But this is a situation where America and Trump is holding back, is pushing back against this anti-Christian globalist movement. The two major world religions, Buddhism and Hinduism, started centuries before Christ. And so they cannot specifically mention Christ because they started before Christ. Islam started 600 years after. And Surah 572 says, if you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, you have committed the unpardonable sin that condemns you to hell. You cannot be any more anti-Christ than by saying if you believe in Christ, you go to hell. If there ever was a religion of anti-Christ, it fits the bill. And the
Mm.
book of Revelation talks about a lot of heads being chopped off. What's the one group that chops off a lot of heads? And so we can begin to see some what looks like book of Revelation type stuff happening here.
Thank you so much. This is so fascinating. The history, it really does help us understand the heart of the Persian people, not the Iranian, the Islamic regime, but the heart of the Persian people and why they are rising up against this evil regime. And as you mentioned, I thank you so much for setting the record straight and what America's God-given role is during this crucial historic time, I would say, especially in the Middle East, and what what the toppling of the Islamic regime could do, for the Middle East and for good for the West and for Israel too. So, Mr. Federer, I just want to thank you so much for shedding so much light on this very important topic.
Well, again, the book that I have this information in is called What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A History of Islam in the United States. And then my website is AmericanMinute.com.
AmericanMinute.com. And again, thank you, Mr. Federer, for the audience listening. I hope that you can maybe glean from this how important it is to pray for the people of Iran, pray for, against this persecution. Is really spiritual, as Mr. Federer so well pointed out for us. And thank you again, and God bless you.
God bless you.